What Hello, hello there, magician. Danny said he was looking for a magician. I think Danny said he was looking for a magician. Ellen. There you go, Ellen the magician.
This is for you. Joe, what? Joe English. Just coming into my mouth right now. Exactly the point right there. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up to the very, very most supportive LNW-SHo. We are having a concert with our very own LNW-SHo.
I thought I only have two, Joe. Can you make me three? I have three Joas, including me as your Joa.
Happy birthday, baby? Oh no! Happy birthday, baby. Yes, happy birthday, mom. Yes, oh yeah. Who is your baby? Who is your baby boy? You! Because you are an angel baby. Angel Burger. You can call me baby also, huh? My friend, you know you are crazy in love. I will call you crazy in love, so yes.
LNW-SHo?
LNW-SHo, yeah. Welcome.
Very proud of you, Scott, to back with Show and the Retro. I see you in the chat box. You're freaking out right now.
You got the look, you got the pipes, you got the vibe, and I'm not going to even sugarcoat it. I'm interested.
I'll let you take a glance at me.
Are you currently under representation right now?
You're the only match for me. Come on, babies, don't be shy.
Hindi na siya, oh.
What you have,
Yan, salamat.
I want.
LNW-SHo, yan.
And what you
Yes
want,
natin ay very available and affordable.
Keep it extra. It's a
Eating egg is crazy. Oh, for you crazy. Today this chapter crazy for you. Show the daddy's opening. So now you will be today. Choose September the for you. You also in between. Choose the regions. Next segment. Fresh eggs, brown eggs.
Welcome to the LNW-SHo.
Hello, W Cutie Pie. I'm the magician. Yeah, Danny said he was looking for a magician, so is that why you're coming as a magician? Maybe? I don't know. I'm just sleeping.
Early 90s, there are a number of victims all disappeared along the same stretch of Highway 20 running across Oregon in the US. This connected the entire state from west to east and ran through the Cascade Mountains. It ran through cities, runs through cities, and some of the most remote areas of the state. So there are plenty of areas here in which somebody could run into trouble. Several stretches of Highway 20 run through thick forests, so heavily wooded that you can walk into it and immediately find yourself lost and disorientated. Any body in those woods would be near on impossible to find. These are the Oregon Highway 20 murders, a partially unsolved serial killer case in which one man was very strongly suspected and even charged for some of the murders, but he died before he reached trial for the rest. Officially, there are 5 people suspected to be victims of the Oregon Highway Killer, but there are many more who might fall under that umbrella, and we're going to explore them all today. You might have also heard this case referred to as the Ghosts of Highway 20, a name that was starred by the Oregonian in a series of stories and documentary episodes that they published just a few years ago. In fact, this case wasn't really known at all until the team at the Oregonians started to investigate, namely reporter Noel, producer Dave Killeen, and vocalist Beth Nakamura. Of course, their work has been a major source for me in creating this episode, and the series, like the articles and all the episodes, will be linked down below if you want to go and take a look. They are truly so well made. But before we get into the story, I do just want to take a moment to talk about Audible, my absolute favourite sponsor to have. Sponsors are so important for me and my channel to ensure that I'm able to keep making these videos for you guys. So I am so grateful to them always for partnering with me. And I'm sure most of you know by now that I am a big reader. I read a lot. I've got a second channel on which I talk about books. That is it. And people always ask me how I'm able to read as much as I do. And the secret is Audible. I listen to so many audiobooks. Cleaning the house, audiobook. Going to do my horse, audiobook. Long car journey, or just any car journey, audiobook. I'm always listening to something. One of my absolute favourite genres are psychological thrillers. I always enjoy thriller, so I was so excited when I heard that Audible have an exclusive on The Cut by Richard Armitage. This is a thriller set in a village in the Midlands here in the UK called Barton Mallet, and a big Hollywood producer has chosen it as a location for his new feature film, with teenagers from a local drama group being encouraged to audition for the movie. Two of these local teens are offered a role each, but as you can probably guess, this is a psychological thriller. There are some things behind the scenes in Barton Mallet that people aren't really thrilled about all this attention. Years ago, there was a brutal murder, a group of friends had their lives shattered, and one of them went to prison. But did they deserve to be there? Well, it looks like the truth is finally about to be uncovered. And that's all I'm going to give you. I'm just going to give you a taste. You can go and listen to it if that intrigues you. If you want to listen to The Cut, which is exclusively available on Audible, then you can head over there right now using the link in my description box down below. And obviously, I'm recommending today that you listen to The Cut, but if thrillers aren't your thing, then don't worry, because Audible have an extensive library, audiobooks, Audible originals, podcasts. Like, you are bound to find something that takes your fancy and captures your imagination, because there's more to imagine when you listen. You can try Audible today with a 30-day free trial, so really, why not? Like, you're missing out. Even if you're not a big reader, if you can't read a physical book, audiobooks, they might change your world. But let's go back to the story today and start by talking about the case of a woman called Kay Turner, who decided to go for a run on Christmas Eve 1978. Kay, her husband Noel, and some friends decided to spend their Christmas holidays in a place called Camp Sherman in Central Oregon. This is officially a census-designated place. It's not even really a town or a village, and although it does have some year-round residents, it's more of a holiday destination. People travel there in the summer, and clearly it's all a nice place to go at Christmas too. It's just a little escape from reality for the Turners, who usually lived in Eugene. Kay was a big runner, she loved running, and so she woke up on Christmas Eve and decided to go for just a little easy 8-mile run. She left at 8:15 a.m. and intended to be back for breakfast in an hour. Kay was 35 years old, she was clearly fit as a fiddle, she was a marathon runner, and she loved to climb a mountain as well, and so this was just very normal behaviour for her. That morning, she'd asked one of the friends if they wanted to come and join her on the run, but the friend wasn't really feeling it, and so off Kay went on her own. Like, it was meant to just be a quick run. She was going to be back in an hour's time. A state highway worker called Thomas Hanna remembered spotting Kay on this run not long after she left. He was on his way home after a night shift, so his timing was, he sort of knew what time he would have been driving through this point. He also remembered seeing another highway worker driving through Camp Sherman that morning as well, and this is important. We'll come back round to this momentarily. By 10 a.m, Kay still hadn't returned back to the holiday home, and Noel, her husband, was beginning to get concerned. He decided to go out for a drive and look for her around Camp Sherman. This wasn't a big place. He probably knew that Kay would be sticking to the roads and paths, so when he drove around and couldn't find her, he really started to panic and called the police, who pretty soon assumed that Noel was definitely 100% involved. During a search of Kay's desk at work later on, it became very clear to investigators that Kay had had 2 affairs with 2 married men in the previous few months, and so obviously that brought a number of potential suspects to the forefront. There was Noel, her husband, the 2 men, and their 2 wives. But the police definitely seemed to be the Seemed to be the most interested in. They thought he must have, even though it seemed that he didn't even know, he had no clue that these affairs were going on. They focused so much time and attention on this theory that they didn't really want to look elsewhere. But there was certainly no proof of Noel's involvement. They looked on. They were like, it was definitely the husband, we're going to find him. And they didn't bother to look anywhere else at all. Within just days, Kay's disappearance was statewide news. Everyone in Oregon was keeping an eye out. It was very clear from early on that something bad. They weren't looking for Kay to be alive, they were looking for a body. Especially when 2 days after 2 sets of footprints and scuffle marks. One set of footprints matched the shoes that Kay would have been wearing, and another set clearly belonged to a large man, the man who was quite obviously Kay away. But for some reason, investigators couldn't. They didn't really look into it much further than just looking at it. It seems they barely even searched for Kay. They focused on Noel so much that they didn't even really look for a body. Very early on in the investigation, though, they came across a man called John Arthur Ackroyd. He would have been 29 years old at this time, and he had been born and raised in Oregon in the tiny logging town of Sweet Home. Yes, genuinely, there is a place called Sweet Home, and a horrible man came from it. Ackroyd had a fairly regular childhood, but he was never very adept at making friends. He found himself a bit of a loner throughout school, he was bullied, and even after he finished high school, where he was a special education student, he still just didn't really ever fit in with anyone ever. He joined the army, where he soon found himself in a bit of trouble. He started working as a mechanic overseas and was then caught stealing equipment, selling drugs, and would go AWOL. Apparently, his fellow soldiers were just horrified by him in general. He showed a real propensity towards violence, particularly to animals. He was odd. Nobody ever really liked him that much. But in 1977, just 1 year before Kay disappeared, he left the army and joined the Oregon State Highway Department, where he essentially became an overseer of the highway. His job was helping people whose cars broke down, keeping an eye on things that needed clearing, helping keep people safe in his dedicated stretch of highway. This dedicated stretch was from Bend all the way out west towards the coast, and that is where he would just drive up and down all day, every day, supposedly keeping people safe. And that's what he was supposed to be doing on the day that Kay Turner went for her run. Ackroyd was questioned by the police 2 weeks into the search after being name-dropped by a colleague as being seen nearby that day. And he did admit that yes, he had seen a runner of Kay's description, but there wasn't really much more that he could tell them. He said that he'd just gotten off work at 6:30 a.m. that day, where he'd been based in Junction, about 25 miles away. When he drove through Camp Sherman, he had just finished his shift and he was apparently off to do some coyote hunting. And detectives believed him and let him go pretty quickly. They didn't think that this was a guy of much interest. They were still very, very focused on the husband at this point. But Ackroyd apparently couldn't help getting himself involved in this case. In August 1979, 8 months after Kay's disappearance, Ackroyd went into a store in Camp Sherman and walked straight up to the shopkeeper, Christine Weston, and told her that he had found Kay Turner's remains. He was in real trouble, he told her, because he was the last one to see her alive, and now he'd found her body whilst he was out hunting rabbits. He knew that that was going to look suspicious, which is a complete coincidence, I am sure. He told her that he was in real trouble because he was the last one to see her alive, and now he'd found her body whilst he was out hunting rabbits. He knew that was going to look suspicious, and he told her as much. A complete coincidence, I'm sure. I mean, Christine had once caught Ackroyd fondling himself in her store whilst looking at the men's magazines. It was just very gross. By the time she went to get her husband to get rid of him, he'd already gone, but she knew that this was a very odd guy. So when investigators arrived, Ackroyd led them into the woods about half a mile from the road to a pile of cloth and bone. This was barely recognised as human remains. It could have very easily just been animal remains, but Aykroyd seemed sure that not only was this human, it was also definitely 100% Kay Turner. And of course, it was. For an outdoorsman like John Aykroyd, finding scraps of clothing in the woods wouldn't have been anything usual, anything really of note. But for some reason, these particular scraps he paid attention to, and he knew it was Kay Turner. But she had obviously seriously decomposed, were scattered. Loads of her left to be found, even though they spent a whole week searching the area. They found her lower jawbone and most of her clothes, or at least some remnants of most of her clothes, but most that were there in this bone pile, they were animal bones. Like, the only thing they could find of Kay at this point was her lower mandible, her lower jawbone. But most importantly at this scene, they had found Kay's watch, which had stopped at 9:27 a.m. on December 24th, meaning this was likely the time she died, the time of the struggle that would have pulled the stem out of the watch and caused it to stop. The rest of Kay's skull would be found by a hunter in 1980, about half a mile away from where the rest of her remains were found. Now, obviously, finally, after this point, John Aykroyd immediately became the #1 suspect in Kay's death. After all this time, they hadn't found anything on Noel Turner, so he just kind of made sense at this point. Aykroyd's entire account of events here was weird, and then he started changing his story, which made it even more obvious that he was somehow involved. He said at one point later on in interviews that he'd actually first spotted Kay's remains here just 2 months after her disappearance, and at that point she hadn't really decomposed, so he was able to share that she had been shot and her throat had been slashed. He described her body at this point in the February in graphic detail, but he didn't report it to the police. Of course, with just a lower jawbone to go on at this point, there was no way for investigators to figure out Kay's actual cause of death, and we didn't know at this point if Aykroyd was telling the truth about her wounds. He also claimed at this point that he touched Kay's arm and hair, which was no doubt trying to cover his own back if forensic evidence was found at the scene. This was 1979,
How
so you
did you
wouldn't
do all
exactly
that
be
with
thinking
the
about
mandible
DNA at this
bone?
point,
What
likely
about
just
how
hair
do
and
you
fingerprints.
touch it?
But
and the
Aykroyd didn't need to
mandible
worry,
bone?
because although he was obviously very weird, and although he was obviously trying very hard to implicate himself in the killing,
You're
maybe
making me
playing
turn
some sort of
off.
game, they didn't have any actual evidence against him. A lot of weird things surrounding the body, but he never admitted to having anything to do with that.
You
They didn't
can't
actually
touch
have any
someones and
wish
all
to
that
arrest
stuff with
him.
just
Then he
mandible
made
bones
another
in the
admission long after own coyote hunting. Ryan were arrested, and further, that was it. But if investigators had looked into Kay's case just a little bit closer, if they'd looked at other similar crimes in the area, Aykroyd could have been taken off the streets at this point, and many lives could have been saved. In spring 1977, not long after Aykroyd started his job on the highway, 20-year-old Marlene Gabrielson was attacked. Now, luckily, Marlene did survive her ordeal, and she would later be able to get a detailed description of her attacker, a man who seemed suspiciously similar to John Aykroyd. Had anyone noticed this at the time, maybe be here telling you this story now. Maybe none of these women need it. But the police seen when she reported her attack. She'd been to a rodeo in Sisters, Oregon with her husband. It was a very big deal as it was her first night out after having a baby 3 months earlier, and she had been really, really excited. Only once there, she ended up getting into an argument with her husband, after which he wanted to go and hang out with some friends, and she wanted to go home and see her daughter. And so she did. She hitched a ride with John Aykroyd. She said that at first she felt completely safe, although she probably was a bit naive. She described his truck as this sort of beat-up old thing with no handles on the doors, no handle to roll down the windows. She was in this truck and she was completely trapped inside. But she just didn't think anything of it. She fell asleep whilst he was driving. But then, an hour later, she woke to him pulling off the highway onto a secluded road, held a knife to her neck, dragged her into it, and raped her. He wouldn't even let her turn away and close her eyes. He made her look at him the entire entire time, which was just unnecessary cruelty. He would later say in an interview 13 years later with the police that Marlene had been making sexual advances towards him, which nobody believes, but that's what he said. Marlene just wanted to get home to her baby. Marlene would later say of her ordeal, "He picks me up by the back of my neck and my hair and threw me up against this wall because it was all
Mate, this
flowers
isn't right, but
blooming,
how can you
little
buy?
trouble.
How can you
First
find
thing
just
was
bones and then
helping
act like you
her
found
in
whole
this
body
kind of
and
poverty,
touch
which is just
parts that aren't
completely
even there, but just
heartbreaking.
mandible bones?
But Marlene was incredibly smart. She knew that she had to go
Do you
home
know
to
what
her
a mandible
daughter
bone
whatever the
is?
cost. She persuaded him not to kill her to take her home, and on that journey home, she knew that he had
Interesting
weapons
story.
within
I'll keep
arm's reach
listening.
in the truck, and so she agreed to become his girlfriend when he asked. Aykroyd drove her to her mother-in-law's house in Lebanon, about 90 miles from Sisters, where the rodeo had been, and in what should have been this very quick journey home, relatively quick journey home, Marlene's life was forever changed. Marlene was so careful to preserve all the evidence from her attack. When she arrived at her mother-in-law's house, she refused to even shower and immediately contacted the police. But from the get-go, her case just wasn't taken seriously. She later said they just viewed her as this dirty native, that she was never going to be believed by them. She never felt supported by the police, and she described her attacker as a big burly man who worked in the woods. A rape kit and the marks and bruises on her body, her clothes cut with a knife, all supported the fact that she had been attacked. But the police just didn't really care, they didn't believe her. And they knew from the get-go that she was talking about John Aykroyd. They even called him in for questioning and made both him and Marlene sit through polygraph tests. And what did these tests show? That she was lying and he was telling the truth. But we've spoken about polygraphs a lot on this channel. I actually have a whole episode dedicated to how useful they really are. There's no way to actually test if somebody is lying or not. That test just doesn't exist. But you can test someone's stress levels through perspiration and heart rate. And the idea is that if somebody is lying, their stress levels are going to be higher. But there are some fairly big flaws with this, and that if an innocent person or a victim of a crime is being questioned by the authorities, they're going to be pretty stressed, meaning that the polygraph test will show as such. And then you've got the fact that if the perpetrator isn't stressed, if they feel no guilt over their actions, if they're habitual liars, as most criminals are, they're going to breeze through a polygraph pretty easily. Especially somebody like John Aykroyd, who doesn't really seem to care. I mean, he literally led authorities to Kay's body. Who would have known if she ever would have been found if he hadn't done this? He wanted to be linked to her and he didn't care. So Marlene put up her best fight to be listened to get this man off the streets, but nothing worked. The authorities just weren't interested in listening to a native woman until a white woman went missing the very next year. But Kay could still be alive if Marlene had been listened to. Marlene's life was destroyed, forever changed, but Aykroyd's just continued on like normal. He didn't even so much as lose his job. And then in the mid-1980s, Aykroyd went on to marry a woman called Linda Pickle. Linda already had 2 children called Rachanda and Byron, and they became Aykroyd's stepchildren. And together the family lived in Santiam Junction, an area in which many highway workers lived, so it was just kind of like a maintenance yard. It wasn't really a village or like a town, it was just a place on the highway where maintenance workers and their families stayed. By this point in the mid-80s, Linda had been a single mum for many, many years, struggling to make ends meet to give her children everything they deserved. She said in the Ghost of Highway 20 documentary that for years she'd had men stealing from her, cheating on her, and when she met John Aykroyd, he simply wasn't that type of man. He was worse, but she didn't know that. He could put on a mask. She thought that he bought her security. He had a good job, he was an ex-army guy, and he helped provide for her children. He came across to her at least as a danger. But it didn't take long for his anger and violence to come through. Friends saying that Rachanda and Byron show up with black eyes, lips, all different signs of domestic violence. Rachanda Pickle was just 13 years old and she'd already dealt with a lot in her life. Her and her older brother Byron each other a lot for support and comfort, and now here they were being abused by their new stepdad at Santiam Junction. Friends say it didn't stop her being who she was, silly and goofy. She was super ignorant as so many young teen girls are, But unlike so many teen girls, she also loved school. Apparently, she dread home time every day because she knew what she was going home to. She would spend every second that she could at school. She felt safe there. Friends say that she was absolutely terrified of going home, and she turned to friends a lot to help her sleep away as often as she could. But nobody really knew exactly what was going on. People kind of suspected that she was being abused, but she never said as much. And there's only so much her friends can do, like they're also just teenage girls. Byron has said that both him and Rachanda were just counting down the days until they were 18 and they could finally get out and just never look back. For the summer of 1990, Byron to let them travel to spend the summer with their father, Stephen Pickle. Now, they barely knew this man. He hadn't really ever been a part of their life, but I just know that they were thinking that he couldn't be any worse than the stepfather. They didn't want to be at Santiam Junction for the summer. They wanted to get away. And as soon as they got there to Stephen sat them down and started asking them about rumours that he'd heard.
Anyways,
Rumours being sexually abused by former partners of
so I can't get
Linda.
over the
He
part
wasn't
of finding
talking about John
mandibles and
Aykroyd, but
saying
he
you're
was talking
touching all
about
these other
Rachanda
parts.
having a long history of sexual abuse. This poor girl had dealt with so much. Now, I don't know the exact situation with Stephen and Linda and the children. I don't know why he hadn't ever really had much contact with his own kids, but he clearly cared his kids were being apparently abused. When they confirmed his suspicions, he immediately got in contact with attorneys to try and take on sole custody of the pair. But things weren't exactly easy. Families and relationships are complicated, and when Rachanda and Byron later wanted to join the neighbourhood kids for a game of hide and seek, Stephen apparently became convinced it was just so they could all go off and have sex. Reminder that they were 14 and 13 years old. Like Rachanda was just 13, and she was actually being sexually abused in her own home by her stepfather. I mean, that's never really been confirmed, but everyone has come. She was very depressed, angry. She was cutting herself. She was being at home with her stepfather. And now she's with her actual father, and she's got a chance to actually go. She's being accused of wanting to have sex with them. It's a very even is trying to protect his kids, but also is making these wild accusations. It's a very strange situation. She was so embarrassed and angry at this accusation that she actually asked to go back home to Santiam Junction to her mum immediately. Anger, but her uncle agreed to take her. He dropped her in Sweet Home, which was kind of one of the closest towns to Santiam Junction. And that's the last time Byron ever saw his sister. Rachanda was very much stuck between a rock and a hard place, it seems, because she got this far, she got to Sweet Home, and then she realized, oh no, I actually don't want to go back home. I don't want to go back to my stepfather. So she started asking back home with her, but no one agreed to. So Rachanda went home and told her mum what her dad was trying to get custody. And Stephen actually also called her and told her that this was what he was doing. And then Linda told John. The very next day, Rachanda disappeared. On the day of her disappearance, 10th of July, both Linda and Aykroyd had to go to work. Only Linda worked longer hours and Aykroyd home early. Why he went home early has always baffled people. He said he'd been planning to go and fix some snow plows, but then realised some parts hadn't arrived, so decided the afternoon off. But there was still plenty of work for him to get on with that day, so why he decided to go home, nobody really knows. According to Aykroyd, he went and asked Rachanda if she wanted to go for a drive with him, photograph some deer, to which she said no. She told him that he had a load of chores that Linda had left her to get through and she was going to do them. He then said when he returned home a couple of hours later, she was gone. He would later go out to pick Linda up from work, and when they got back, Rachanda still wasn't home. But they didn't really do much of a search, they just assumed that she would be home soon. And Linda and Aykroyd even took advantage of this to have sex, which is very notable because apparently they never had sex. Like, Aykroyd had an incredibly low libido, but on this day, of all days, he was suddenly in the mood. In a police interview 11 days after her disappearance, Aykroyd told an officer that Rachanda was a nice-looking girl who was getting developed. That apparently it'd be very easy for somebody to get her in a car and take her away, alluding to the fact that somebody else, definitely not him, probably abducted her. She was very easily intimidated, he said, especially if somebody maybe had a knife or a gun on them. Every time Richanda left the house, even if it was just to go hang out with friends, she would leave a note for her mother letting her know where she was going, what time she was going to get home. But there was no note on this day, nor had she taken anything. Her belongings were in their usual place in her room. Linda has said apparently she knew instantly that something wasn't right, but Aykroyd told her that she wouldn't be able to report her daughter as missing until 24 hours had passed. And Linda believed him. She called the police the next morning. There's a recording of this 911 call in the Ghost of Highway 20 documentary, and you can hear the disbelief in the voice of the responder on that 911 call. Like, she cannot fathom why Linda has waited so long to report her 13-year-old daughter as missing. But I am trying not to judge too harshly here, because I have covered so many cases where police have put people off, saying they need to wait a certain number of hours or days before they report somebody as missing. So I do know where that misinformation comes from. I just don't think John Aykroyd was misinformed. More like between what was likely his crime investigation into where Richard searches for weeks of underwear belonging to her. And this underwear was found whilst John Aykroyd was actually stood right there, because of course he likes to be close to the action. And what happened to Aykroyd in the moment that these underwear were found? He got an erection. You cannot make this shit up. From the very beginning here, investigators had him at the forefront of their minds. Like, he was immediately number one suspect. There were just too many strange things that had happened around this man for him not to be involved here with his own stepdaughter. But they had to make sure they could actually get him this time around. There was just too much at stake. He couldn't be allowed to roam free any longer. But Richanda's body has never been found, and without a body, in this time it was really hard to prosecute anything. But what they did have was Kay Turner's body, or at least they had some of Kay's body, and so they turned their focus back to her and her case. They knew they had to get John Aykroyd off the streets before he hurt somebody else, but they weren't able to. They didn't do it in time, and 2 more people did get hurt, killed. There are 2 more victims who investigators heartedly believe died at the house of Sanders and 19-year-old Sheila Swanson, 2 girls who just so happened to be running in the same circles as him at the time they disappeared. Melissa and Sheila were very good friends who had met several months earlier, and they instantly bonded. They had really similar backstories, like very difficult lives interspersed with drugs, alcohol, and abuse. They both dropped out of high school. They understood each other in a way that nobody else really did. That created a really fast bond between them. So when the Sanders family decided to go for a camping trip at Beverly Beach State Park in the spring of 1992, of course Sheila was to come along. But the pair soon got restless and decided they wanted to leave. They asked their boyfriends to come and pick them up from the campsite, but the boyfriend said no. So, young and braver than they probably should have been, they most likely decided to hitchhike back home instead, on a route that would have taken them along Highway 20. Sheila was from a Highway 20 town called Lebanon, or Lebanon, I heard it pronounced differently in different sources, and Melissa and her family were actually from Sweet Home, the same small town that John Aykroyd came from. And when they just disappeared one morning overnight, the family assumed that that's where the girls had headed off back to. These teenage girls were free spirits, and they were very independent. They had their own minds, and they didn't particularly want to be hanging out with Melissa's family. So when the family woke up one morning on the camping trip and there was just no sign of the girls, they just assumed they'd got a friend to pick them up and take them back home. They really didn't worry at this point, like this was quite par for the course with these girls. It was only when they went back to Sweet Home later that week that they realised that something was amiss, because there was no sign of either Melissa or Sheila. But still though, they didn't outright panic. It was only a few days after that, still with no whispers of the girls, that they contacted the police. And even still, when Sheila's family reported her as missing to the Lebanon police, they just dismissed it, saying it was well within Sheila's nature to just disappear. There was never much of a search for either of the girls. The police just didn't really care. They thought they were runaways. It was only in the October of 1992, so many months on now, when some hunters hunting off Highway 20 came across some human remains, that anyone realised that the girls just hadn't run away. They had been murdered, and here were their bodies. Sheila was found with her ankles bound, her leggings, but her shoes and socks were still on her feet. Melissa was found completely nude, although parts of her body had been ravaged and dragged away by animals. The medical examiner speculated that they may have been strangled, but the level of decomposition made it very difficult to say for sure. It was just speculation. Investigators found a rivet near the bodies, which they suspected may have fallen out of the pocket of the attacker, and this should have been a very big clue. This was something often used in field repairs by people like John Ackroyd. So what was John Ackroyd doing in this time? By 1992, him and Linda had split up, and he was also no longer living in Santiam Junction. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Santiam Junction isn't exactly a community, it's just a place for people who work on the highways with the Oregon Department of Transport to live, so they have an easy access to the highway for their job. It's for employees and their families, they can park their cars there, but there's not exactly like anything there. There's no community, there's no shops, it's just a place where some people live near the highway. But over the previous few years, there had been a lot of complaints from fellow colleagues living at Santiam Junction about John Ackroyd, that he made them really, really uncomfortable. Of course, everyone knew by this point that he'd been suspected in at least 2 murders, and the strangest thing was that he just didn't really seem to care. He wore this like a badge of honour, he bragged about it. He was a strange, strange guy, and people didn't like him, let alone living in the same small community as him. So the Oregon Department of Transport made the decision to move his base from Santiam Junction to Sweet Home, which is where he moved back in with his mother and kept his truck at a car shop nearby. The owner of this shop apparently tried to fight back when he was told that John Ackroyd was moving in, but there was no choice. He was told it had to happen. He was going to do it. But this would turn out to be a massive mistake, because at least at Santiam Junction, although people didn't like him, he had eyes on him pretty much all of the time. People knew his comings and goings, he was held accountable for where he was at what time. But now he was back in Sweet Home, living with his mother again, simply dropping his truck off at this shop overnight and then picking it up again first thing in the morning. There was no accountability, there was no one watching him, no one making sure that they knew where he was. He was now free to go and do whatever he liked, and he probably did just that. So now he was living back home in Sweet Home, he also spent a lot of time hanging out in Lebanon as well. These were like neighbouring communities, they had a lot to do with each other. He started hanging out at a local Shari's restaurant, a 24/7 diner where people would often hang out. Teenagers would hang out there a lot because there just wasn't loads to do in this area. And those teenagers, of course, included Melissa and Sheila. Not long before their deaths, they started talking about a new friend they'd made at Shari's, a man called John who worked for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Apparently, everyone knew that John was a pervert. The teenagers all called him Perv. Obviously, he was this 40-something-year-old guy now, hanging out with teenagers, but he would give them lifts and they would exploit him, or so they thought. Sheila and Melissa would hang out at Shari's almost every single night, and so would John. And it naturally came up one day that they were heading to the beach for a camping trip with Melissa's family. And that's when John started talking about how he had a house in Newport, and weirdly enough, he was thinking about having a party the very weekend that they were away. Newport was/is only a 10-minute drive from Beverly Beach, and no one seemed that interested in going to this pervert's party, but Melissa and Sheila did. Like, it was only 10 minutes away. What are the chances? Why would they not go? At least that's what they told him, because it doesn't look like they actually did end up going to this party on the Saturday night as planned. But they did still end up going missing. So the question is, did they call John Ackroyd to come and pick them up? Did they hitchhike to his place? Did they manage to get back as far as Sweet Home and then they saw him at Shari's and then something happened? Well, what the authorities think is that the girls left at the crack of dawn to hitchhike back home. Sheila was known to be scared of the dark, and so she wouldn't have left in the middle of the night. They think that she left that day at the crack of dawn. And at that point, John Ackroyd would have been on his work route at the time, driving from Sweet Home through to Newport. So did he just so happen to run into these girls hiking and took a chance? Because he was without a doubt an opportunist. He wouldn't really go to great lengths to plan his crimes, they just happened to fall into his lap. So he's driving on his work route, he sees Sheila and Melissa trying to hitchhike, and it just seemed like fate to him. Maybe. The girls were found near Newport off of Hayes Creek Road, and this wasn't an area that many people would have known about, perhaps unless you maybe worked on the highway every single day of your lives. And this area was also on the route that they would have had to have hitchhiked to get back home. But so frustratingly, no connection was made to Ackroyd at the time. There wasn't even really any investigation into their deaths. Investigators did look at a very level of DNA testing that would have been available at this time. They basically took some of Melissa's jewelry and some of her mother's jewelry to test for mitochondrial DNA. And then they also found the truck that Ackroyd would have been driving on the day that Melissa and Sheila disappeared, and they intended to test the truck for DNA once they got Melissa's off of this jewelry. But they were never able to extract any of Melissa's DNA, and so they weren't able to test it against the truck. And that's kind of where that came to an end. Like, there was nothing to test. They never really looked into it any further than that. That is literally about all the investigation there was into Melissa and Sheila's death, and I just cannot fathom why. They knew this guy was dead, and Rachanda's cases at this point in time in 1992. So why not try and strengthen investigation with these ones too? In fact, I am pretty sure that by the time Melissa had already been arrested for Kay's murder. I'll circle back round to that in just 1 second. Like, why would they not try and link him to Melissa and Sheila's deaths more carefully? Like, why would they not try and follow this through? I can't fathom it. Years later, colleagues of his would later come forward saying that at 9:30 p.m. one night, around the time that Melissa and Sheila disappeared, Ackroyd turns up at the shop in Sweet Home and surprises them. He is completely covered in blood, and this is the shop where he kept his truck overnight. It's where he dropped off at night and picked up in the morning, or if he was on the night shift, the other way around. So he turns up completely covered in blood, and when they asked him, like, what the hell's gone on here, he said that he'd hit a deer and had to gut it. He apparently was laughing, and then the conversation moved on. The colleagues didn't really want to pry any further. They didn't like immediately go to like, oh, he's murdered someone. They just thought he was a weird guy and didn't really want to engage in any further conversation. But nowadays, years later, they have become convinced that this was linked to the girls. Not that the police ever really asked them about it, because like I said, there was just such investigation here.
Makes a lot of sense. I don't understand how a mandible bone with an arm to the person they didn't him to the body, but he's same person. I understand the body is kind of just in the
Hello, welcome to my channel. Today we're looking at Stanley Marvin Burnson. Have you ever heard of him? He was born in 1936. He's an American kidnapper, murderer, and self-confessed serial killer. And some of which he claimed to have committed in the company of notorious serial killer Ted Bundy. So he's saying he's friends with Ted Bundy and that he was running around killing with him. So, some people claim they do things that they didn't do. So, did he do them or didn't he? I don't know. Let's take a look at him and some of the crimes. And this is State versus Burnson, and this talks about evidence and things like that. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. It says he's charged with murder. The state of appeals from a pretrial, excluding other crimes evidence, which it wants to offer at trial to prove identity and to defendant in the event that he excluded the evidence for reasons of unfair prejudice and undue delay in the proceedings. We reverse and remand. On December 23rd, 1978, Yvonne Weber was reported missing. In 1985, her remains were found in a area near the Cold Springs Reservoir and Umti. Contained a .22 caliber bullet. The state once established these facts. Defendant became acquainted with Weber after he met her in a Umatilla restaurant, which he was on his produce sales route. And I remember doing a video about they were trying to find somebody that they thought maybe traveled for work and was a salesman or maybe a produce salesman, and he fits that description. So, and I can't remember which video I did or which crimes, but it might have been somewhere they were left alone. The told Weber's found her attractive. If Weber disappeared, she told her mother that a man had offered her a job, which paid a good salary, included new clothes, a business card. On December 22nd, 1978, Weber appeared to be waiting for someone in a Umatilla grocery store. She left the store walking in the direction of the
The Police Department is putting a renewed focus. We want the communities of victims to know and that they have a point of contact for cases, because we believe media attention will generate the right tip.
My name is Kevin Kays, and I'm specifically working to also conduct investigations for those that are suspicious circumstances in Maribel. Walking away from her friend's hand to State Avenue, when she did know nothing. Within a couple of weeks, no confirmed information was ever learned. Although there were rumors that Susan may have trucked behind the Sport Tavern, this was never.
And my sister Susan Libby won, and marked 33 years on April 20th day. So just bring more awareness about her disappearance, who were around back in the day and know people she was associated with or have heard any rumors or anything, no matter how insignificant you think it might be. Those are the things that can break a case open. She had a daughter in 1987, and the last time I saw her daughter was 4 years old, and she is now 37 years old, so she's older than her mother ever lived to be. I also have original flyers that my mother put together in 1991, and the age. I'll have photos on them. It was literally cut and paste, and then was copied and passed out around town. And there's also some information, just a narrative that I put together of Susan's life and what led her here to be on the streets, how she fell into addiction, and that ultimately found any remains. My family and I have been looking for answers all years, because I absolutely believe that there are people in this community with things. I know there are. So I just need someone to please put your own fear. You can leave tips anonymously. Just say anything that you know. If maybe you saw something that you don't is relevant, it very likely is. In such a high-risk lifestyle, every day of their life life when they're out here surviving is relevant, whatever they're doing, because they're coming across people who are eventually dangerous to them. And she was incredibly vulnerable. She was alone. She had no lodgings. She had no money, and she was addicted. So every day was about survival. If somebody was willing to come forward with what they know, that would mean everything. It's been 33 years, and I was only 22, and I'm 57. Our family is shattered by this. Just find it within themselves. Please, please say something. You could give us some peace. That would be momentous. Susan would want to be back with her family. We just get remains. That's where she would want to be. That's where we want her to be. So that we have a place to visit her and honor. And just have that peace knowing, you're calm. No one will take you away again. And out of time. That's really all we want.
The reasons for Susan's disappearance is unknown, and we continue to search for clues. If you or anyone you know has information regarding Susan's disappearance, please contact the police department and help bring Susan home.
Unidentified persons with the common name and within state control with our public and our update regularly. A lot of names and Michelle encoding a lot of these different names. This guy had great before. When I don't know if these Caldera 15 or Rose Lab as a new with one work Victoria Salazar 1.2 Trinidad Junior Maldonado 2022 Mary Young Running Queen Cody Turner with license 2015 US of Graham there's Juan Hernandez 20 July 3rd 2009 Very Regal because the Yakima December 25th 2007 he then attended the Wade Christmas dinner and heard from Sally Sternberg disappeared on August 12th 2005 Crazy Anderson when she was last seen on September 11th 1999 towards the Matthews River Anderson with his head drowned river Eleanor Trujillo Norman Madeira 60 was last seen by a relative at the Yakima area in June 1991 Susan Libby Maribel 34 was last thing downhill. William Wayne Miranda, 31, was last seen gaining his vehicle near the Sports Center December 7, 1990. Marcelina Flores Contreras, last seen June 25, 1986. Catherine Roseanne Paulson, 22, was last heard from July 1979. That's a lot of pictures. That's fine. That's fine. Is it 50 notes are missing, and then she does it. She does it. It's not it doesn't mean 12. No, no.
21 of them being from the children. Here is information on the missing adults. This Lawrence J. Rigel of Yakima, this Chris Fowler missing from White Pass since October 12, 2016. Andrea Knuckles missing Sunnyside since January 20. Data from the many indigenous local people have been missing since 2022. A handful missing for many years back, according to the state, for just a few months. Some
from people who live Yakima good.
Therapy uses horses to help people both mentally and physically, but
I don't know if they still use the mic. Because I compiled a big list. Or they had them all listed in like one thing. They're not on the same thing. Like every police department, yeah, was used to be have their own. They were paying attention really. You have pictures and stuff. Used to be. Okay, I can use 24 cells are missed from Yakshin. D3 to 20 as is he in these people came on anything. Michael Hansen. I've never heard of that one. It's Colton. Raw Wall.
money out of it. Costs nothing to install the panels, and you can immediately do a new, but we will just qualifies. See if you can make dollars or even $500 per month with solar.
Yakima County are missing 21 of them. Nation the last week. We've told you of the missing children. Here is some information on the missing adults. This Lawrence J. Rigel of Yakima missing from White Pass since 2016, since January. Data from the Washington people have been missing since 2012. They have found several over the last few months.
People who live and work in our beautiful valley.
He uses horses to help people both mentally and physically. But did you know therapeutic riding nonprofit organization in Yakima? Franklin Tripo
started in program purchased this
Pegasus, Yakima County that specializes in therapy. They actually in 40 and
2013. There's a lot of men from being around horses and riding, judgmental. They kind of meet you where you're at.
A horse's ability to adapt to the rider is an important part of why they are a good therapeutic animal.
They seem to sense when someone is nervous or when they don't have much confidence, and they kind of meet you at your skill level.
Horses also act similarly to humans, despite double the amount of legs.
As far as riding, the movement of a horse actually mimics a person's hip when they walk. And so just the movement of a horse can be very therapeutic and can help a lot of people that have like mobility issues or, you know, working on their balance or their core strength, their hand-eye coordination. There's a lot of mental and physical benefits to it.
Pegasus Project works with all kinds of people wherever they are.
Yeah, so we will work with anyone who has a formal diagnosis of some sort, so mental or physical, very wide or on up through adults. We actually have 2 ladies in their 80s that still ride with us on a weekly basis. So,
Reporting Yakima for Action News, I'm John Franklin.
Thanks, John. And they will be hosting a on Saturday.
Our news this Labor Day, the Ellensburg Rodeo is celebrating 101 years this weekend. Part of the rodeo is the come to watch it. Action News was at the event and spoke to a few fans enjoying the festivities.
It's one of the best rodeos in the country.
Very American.
Right.
People came from far and wide to Cowboys Ellensburg Rodeo.
We live in Minnesota. We came back
to watch the Ellensburg Rodeo 45 years after she was in the arena as the King County Princess.
Grew up here. My grandmother's house was right behind us, so I grew up all summers in Ellensburg. And when I went to rodeo every year since I'm princess, it was a lot of fun because I'm from Seattle.
Some people even traveled overseas to find themselves at this annual tradition.
Melbourne, Australia, here for the rodeo in Ellensburg.
And they weren't.
It's good. It's awesome. One of the best days we've had in a long time. It's here. We're having a lot of fun. Good. Yeah, we'll be back next week. We'll be back.
This year, part of the reason car in Washington has nothing to do with the action in the arena.
I'm getting married on Saturday, and my future wife is from. I love you, Alex.
One cowboy found himself at the rodeo on the stage you'd think.
This is the first time I've performed on the stage. I've actually roped at this rodeo numerous times. I went to college at Central Washington as well. So, yeah, this is a different spot for me to be performing, but it's going to be kind of fun.
The Stewart family has a long tradition of being at the rodeo.
Yeah, I've been to this rodeo for a long time. We're Royal City, which is about 60 miles across the river. And my grandpa, my great grandpa, everybody's been coming to this rodeo in my family for years. So it's kind of one of a staple in what we do this time of year on Labor Day.
Reporting in Ellensburg for Action News, I'm John Franklin.
And today was the last day of competition, but organizers tell us you can set your calendars for next year on Labor Day weekend for the 102nd running of the rodeo.
Okay, we'll just watch video and see what it says. Confusing because 63 20. So that's confusing.
If you have a utility meter on the side of your house, you can get paid to go solar for no money out of it. It costs nothing to install the panels, and you runs backwards, and then you get paid for the
$24 from Yakima County at Medicine, 21 in Missouri. There's people that have are old cases. Or at home. Mine 2022 or earlier. When I zero just federal 2022 federal 2022 637. Not forget how many Walshy 2022 Yakima Police Department. Kathleen 1979. Richard Rodriguez 1983. Marcelina Contreras 1986. Kevin Hell 1987. Never heard of Kevin Hell before. Jolene Moran 1990. 91. Alan Orto 1996. Craig Anderson 1999. Sally Steinberg 2005. Gregory Holt 2008. I think I heard of that, but I didn't know they were from Mars. Jose Ortega Jimenez, Juan Hernandez 2009. Kobe for 2015. What happened to Chad? Did he get found? Detroit Lorello 2019. Martinez 2019. Steve Chandler 2021. Bill Gutierrez 1. McEwen 2021. McEwen. Huh. Minnie Williams 2022. Geraldo Pimentel. Rio 2022. Trinidad Malderonda 2022. Sergio Mendoza 2022. Everyone named that missing in 2022. Are they still missing? Maria Hernandez Lopez 2022. Lorena Hummer 2022. Michelle 8. Reyes Messias 9. Jesus Rodriguez 2005. Estela Rios 2013. Can Canfield 2015, not 3000. Is that even right? No, they got the name. I mean, Villa Rail 2014, I 7. Chris Bell 2016. Jose Canales 2008. Bernard Crystal Kindness 2022. Now, another girl named Kindness has a post to Oregon. Rosalita Evers 1986. Francisco Mendoza 1994. Police Department. Alejandro Mexicano 2021, 2015. Kira Chris Busto 2004. Or Die. Kira character. Justin Rand 2016. Sunny Side Park. Me and Al Gonzalez. People I don't know. I want to look at this one. Where it go? Person was that? There was a girl named Ruth in this one. Has true paragraph booze that guy or girl. Well, look for what I'm looking for. You're like off on other people. That person's still missing. Stop it. don't eat my feet, please. Spiders like my feet as it is. Spiders like eat my feet. Please don't eat my feet, Danny. Please don't let Danny eat my feet. Danny, eat my feet. Danny, eat my feet. No, no, no. Lady Bell Adventures, hello, hello. Teacher Chrissy, hello. Hello, Lady Bell. Nice to see you. Teacher Crazy. Drop the link.